Welcome all
Hello.
to Liminal Writing.
Hi, welcome to Liminal Writing. For those of you who just joined us or found us wherever you get your podcasts, it's a space where Lee and I choose a trigger phrase or line and go into this 10-minute time writing that's just free flow.
Yeah,
And then at the end of that 10 minutes, we stop and then we read what we wrote to each other and then chat a bit about it. So
yeah.
that's where we're at. And today we decided to go back to some of the old writings we did when early on we didn't really record
hmm
the conversations we had. And so we thought it would still be good to look back again and read them with you listening to us.
So with this one is kind of a rediscovery for us, and then a new session for those who are listening right now. The line is parent-child relationship is what we chose as our trigger phrase. In the grand tradition of who is starting, it's always Ces. Or most of the time it has been Ces who leads the session and opens up with her work. So Ces, baton over to you.
Okay. So here's what I wrote: parent child relationship or nurtured dynamics.
Mm,
There is a scene that I remember when the name, the nickname for my son, Uyi was a small kid. He would have been maybe 5 or 6 years old. I had a group of women who gathered at our living room. We were joined together in this shared experience of having survived child sexual abuse. I asked Uyi to stay in his room as we, the group of women, were going into this discussion or sharing session of some sort. He didn't like being excluded, having been used to me always making him feel included. There was no such thing as an adult only conversation. There was always a way to explain things that would make sense to his young mind. He
mm,
sulked in his room, sat at the edge of his bed, sad and annoyed.
mm,
I checked on him once in a while, always asking, "Are you okay?" One time, I checked in again and saw him standing by the window looking out. And again, I asked on how he was. Again, I tried explaining and apologizing for the fact that he couldn't join the activity outside of his room.
mm,
And then this little child of mine snaps back and says, "Nagiging okay na nga ako, kaya lang balik ka ng balik, paano ako magiging okay?" In other words, he was saying, I was becoming okay, but you
mm,
keep coming back again to ask how I am. So how could I be okay? I can't get to being okay when you keep coming back. So there, I was given my lesson. This little young man, all of 5 years old, taught me about giving space for feelings to settle, for
mm.
strange boundaries to be understood and sink in, if given time and not stirred back into the muddled whirls that I brought him into. So there, that's what
Wow.
came out of the writing. It wasn't really a phrase, it was like a notion. This is an example of that. We said, let's just write about parent child relationship or any kind of dynamic that there's a nurturer and a person who's nurtured. Your
Wow.
turn, Lee.
My turn. Let's see where I landed on this. I had a few moments of keeping still, my fingers floating over the keys, waiting for an image in my mind of what my parent child relationship is. Both of them, my parents, are gone now. I wonder if they'll recognize me when we see each other again. What form will we each take at the moment we stand in front of each other and feel wrapped in the joy of knowing each other once more? Papa made memories of grilled fish, of steak in his special skillet swimming in butter, of trips to Lake Bulusan, of horseback rides in Baguio, of the joys of listening to music and food. Mama made for all the growing up years, both good and full of laughter, and also the disappointments, brewed in silence and simmer of seeking permissions after the fact. Have I turned out the way that they had hoped for their child? Perhaps in the best possible way of shaping me to the best of where their heart carried me. For all the love, tears, and gratitude we have for each other, as I chose them to be my parents, and I, their first imprimatur.
You
21.
spoke from being the child. I spoke
Correct.
from being the mother. One thought that came to mind when you were describing your dad, how
Mm,
food is such a language of love.
definitely.
Food and the preparation of food is such a language of love, and then also how it then figures in our memory too, because maybe
Mm-hmm.
of the energy that surrounded that
Yes.
preparation of the food, the smells of it, and the taste. It was maybe served in the context of a loving moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's the act of caring. It's remembering seeing Papa standing over a barbecue stand and preparing the grill. He was outside. He was in a shaded area, and he would have fish. And the fish we knew then would come from his province. So my lola, his mom, would send
Mm,
over fish and fresh fish
fresh.
in styrofoam, and then
Ooh,
it would have been picked up by Papa from the bus depot and then brought home. And so that memory of opening up the styrofoam and
yeah.
cleaning the fish and then putting it on the grill. And I also remember
Wow.
he had this special skillet only for the steak. And it would be like lots
Oh,
of butter.
really?
And you're
Ooh.
right. It's the language of love and care passed
Mm.
down. So it's like happy memories because talking about food and you're listening to stories. What
Mhm.
I particularly like, and I think because I know Uyi, right? So I've seen him grow up, is that image that you've captured in your writing about him figuring out what it is and then being safe and brave enough to let you, his mom, know that you're interrupting my process. He's basically telling you, I have my own process of handling all these big feelings that I have
Yeah.
because you're having your own session, whereas before I was part. And so I'm figuring it out. And each time that you check on me, you're kind of rerouting my process again.
That
Speaks
was
to,
funny.
yeah, it is funny because it's coming from a child, but it's also very mature. And it speaks to the way that you have brought him up.
It.
Kids would think like, how can I even explain to my mother that I'm having this? Most kids, I think, would just sulk and not answer your question. But he felt big and short enough to say, you know, balik ka ng balik eh. So
You keep coming back.
yeah, you're disrupting
But you
my
know, I was worried. I'd knock again and go in again. Are you
yeah.
okay? And then I go out and then I knock him. Are you okay? So
It's
yeah.
interesting if you get the chance, if he remembers this, right?
He had this thing about always being included in conversation. Like when he was with his dad's side, they were
Yeah.
more traditional. He was told as a kid, this conversation is for adults, leave the table. He resented it so much.
Mm.
His grandma told me on the phone that Uyi was becoming like reclusive from them, would doesn't
Mm.
relate to them so much. And then I spoke to, and he was like 12, 11, 12.
Mm.
I said, what's happening? And he said, well, because they don't want me included in their conversation, actually.
Um,
And then he goes, so I'm also not including them in my
oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
He took it bad, Lisa, when he was like, why are the adults talking? I'm part of this family.
Yeah.
Part, why am I? That's so funny.
So that was a conscious choice on your part, a conscious parenting choice on your part, says to include him.
Yeah. Yeah. Conscious in the sense that there's no such thing as, no, you can't understand it. She's still young or something like
Mm.
that. Or sometimes we actually tell kids, right? The old way was you don't explain it because
Yeah.
you'll understand it when you're older.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was a laziness to that as a parent.
Mm.
Then
Mm.
I thought there must be a way to explain things within the realm of that they can understand.
Yeah.
So it's just an effort to break it down to simpler concepts or things he can relate it at whatever age. And you know what? It became a skill. It became something that I brought to my work.
How so?
I'm
Talk a little more.
realizing it because, for example, when I went into my first international development work was in popular education, the use of creative methodologies and participatory methods in adult education,
Mm.
non-formal education.
Yes.
And I was in another country, right, in Cambodia, with a different language. But
Yeah.
again, these are non-literate, quote unquote, in the Western sense of it.
Mm.
But it was about setting up participatory methodologies using these to teach basic sanitation and first aid skills to street kids, for
Yeah.
example.
Mm.
That was street kids and waste pickers. And the other one was, for example, engaging communities to prepare them for the coming of infrastructure in water, where before it was water from the rivers. Now we're going to set up water
Yeah.
systems in their homes.
Mm.
So, how do you educate, help the community prepare for this different level of technology, and also
Mm.
what sanitation means and all that?
Mm.
Simplify the notions of community, collective work,
Yeah.
responsibility, accountability, joint ownership, things like that. Like development concepts
Mm.
and community organizing too, but simplified. You
Yeah.
simplify, break it up. And I think that helped me later on because I was practicing it with my son.
Mm. Yeah. Mm.
And I see now that that kind of effort,
Yeah.
because we tend to, in some professions anyway, sometimes it's easier for us to do shortcuts in terms of explaining by blurting out these concepts and terminologies. But really, it's sometimes a challenge to break it down into the simpler elements of what you're
Yeah.
trying to.
Yes, I think even in facilitating,
Mm.
if you're introducing a new concept to a group of
Mm.
adult learners, I myself need to fully understand it. The way to do it is the clearest message. And typically, the clearest message is almost always the simplest message, right? So you get down to the core of it in the nurturer or parent child dynamics. You're not asking the child to make a decision, but you're including him so that some concepts will be lodged in his brain or it'll just be simmering there. I
Mm.
don't think it's too heavy a thing because you're not asking Uyi then to make a decision. You're including him in that environment, or you've included him in an environment where you're talking about things which he'll eventually
Mm.
move into as an adult to be exposed at an early age. I don't think it was like a heavy burden. And I think that's
Yeah.
a excellent way to do it. To bring up human beings who are good, who are decent, who know their way around
I
or about
hope
the world.
I did
So
something right.
yes,
On
on
that
that
note,
note,
that's where it brought us. Parent child relationship or nurtured, being nurtured or being the nurturer, write something about it. Give yourself 10 minutes to just kind of go on a free flow and see where it takes you. We hope
right.
you also get into the practice of liminal writing. I'd like to share this experience with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening in.
Thank you. See you next time,
Till
folks.
next time.